so clearly. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is something very special. Never before has a Dragon Ball game been so hyped, so anticipated. But why though? What is it about a sequel to a 17-year-old game that is so special? Well, in this video, we're not only going to take a brief glimpse at the history of Dragon Ball video games to see how we got to this point, we're going to examine why Sparking Zero isn't just a video game. It's more than that. It's the culmination of a video game series that contains the very essence of what made Dragon Ball one of the most popular shonen manga in history. Man, I can't wait for Sparking Zero to finally drop. Oh, what's that page that keeps me up to date with the latest video game releases, you ask? Oh well, that's just one of the many features provided by this video sponsor, Opera GX. If you're still a Google Chrome Dome or a Microsoft Edgelord, you should definitely upgrade your browser to Opera GX today for free using the link in my description. That's www.operagx.gg/casualanime-guy-explains. As I personally have already benefited from their amazing browser. You see, as a video editor, I need to make sure that my browser isn't eating up all my RAM, and the GX control feature allows me to do just that. And that's just one feature in Opera GX's sidebar that is jam-packed with features and options to make your browsing experience as optimal as possible. Wanna chat with your friends on Discord? Boom, it's already there in the sidebar. Wanna shitpost on Twitter and watch YouTube at the same time? Go right ahead. Wanna take that YouTube video, watch it while scrolling Instagram? Of course, Opera GX has you covered. And if while during your endless scrolling, you find yourself asking the big questions in life like, is it too late for me to start watching One Piece? Then Opera GX's sidebar again has you covered. With its Aria AI chatbot, that says yes, you should start watching it, and yes, it's completely right. But if you want a second opinion, just ask ChatGPT. And while you catch up with peak fiction, customize your browser with amazing mods. As an old school gamer, I love this retro mod called GX Boy, which features an 8-bit gaming inspired motion wallpaper and sound effects as you interact with the browser. But then I spotted a Dragon Ball theme mod, and you know your boy just had to get it. The motion wallpapers there are beautiful, and I could keep those wallpapers while retaining the retro gaming sound effects I like from the GX Boy mod, because Opera GX is just that customizable. Oh, but what about all my bookmarks and passwords from my old browser, I hear you ask? Well, Opera GX allows you to port that right over in no time at all. Now, if you want to support the channel for free, download Opera GX today using the link in my description. That's www.operaGX.gg/casualanime-guy-explains. Thank you Opera GX for sponsoring this video. It won't let you down like Dragon Ball GT. So have you ever thought to yourself, what is it about the Tenkaichi games that makes them so special? Well, to answer that, we must understand what makes Dragon Ball itself so special. Well, for one, there's its memorable cast of characters set in a universe where everyone, from gods to genocidal racists, knows Kung Fu. Therefore, it's no surprise that in such a setting, the main draw of the series is in its martial arts battles and fight scenes, and the secret sauce that Akira Toriyama added to these fight scenes that had them withstand the test of time nigh 30 years later is, well, depth. Well, not depth in the narrative sense, since most fights in the series occur as part of the rules of a martial arts tournament, or the Z fighters are fighting some comically evil bad guy who wants to rule or destroy the earth or universe or whatever. No, I mean depth in the literal sense. Depth in the third axis, depth of the third dimensional variety.
You see, Toriyama loved to use dynamic angles in the Dragon Ball manga as a way to make his fights look more like the old school martial arts films that he loved watching so much.
The creation and mindfulness Toriyama had when creating depth in his manga is something that appeared to be innate within him, according to the man himself. He didn't have a trick or technique, he was simply conscious of it after years of illustration work and working on 3D model building as a hobby in his spare time. Therefore, within his fight scenes, Toriyama was always mindful of where his characters were in relation to each other. Making his manga easy to read and follow was of great importance to him, and so his sense of space was very sharp. So much so that Toriyama was able to transform a 2D medium into a 3D one. During the Tenkaichi tournaments in the OG Dragon Ball days, Akira Toriyama got to showcase this skill constantly and is a huge reason for Dragon Ball's rise in popularity, as this made Dragon Ball's fights really jump off the page, as characters would quite literally clip through the panels themselves as a way to emphasize the 3D aspect of the fight scene. As the manga progressed, Toriyama gave his characters the ability of flight, the ability to move in 3 dimensions at will. Combining this with his penchant for 3D fight scenes, you get fight scenes which are still top tier shonen manga material to this day. Case in point, Kaioken x3 Goku vs Vegeta. I mean, just look at how Goku flies all around Vegeta, attacking him from all possible angles, and to make sure the reader's eye didn't get lost in all the action, Akira Toriyama would draw beam trails and auras as a way to guide the reader's eye. So when you adapt these 3-dimensional dynamic fight scenes to the world of anime, you get anime fight scenes so legendary and iconic that they deserve to be preserved in a museum. So naturally, fans of Dragon Ball Z would try to live out these power fantasies any way they could, but unfortunately, due to the limitations of the human body, we cannot fly at supersonic speeds, nor can we fire energy blasts from our hands. So it's as the old saying goes, those who can't do, play video games. And over the decades, Dragon Ball has had a multitude of video game adaptations, so much so that it was awarded the Guinness Book World Record for the most video game adaptations based on a Japanese comic book. And so it's of no surprise that with this journey of Dragon Ball games, it started with humble beginnings, with Dragon Ball Daihikyu on the Super Cassette Epoch tape. I know I said that console name wrong, I didn't know it existed before I researched for this video. And as for the game itself, what the hell? It's certainly one of the video games of all time. But as video games would get more powerful, video game publishers would still try and replicate Dragon Ball's insane 3D planet-destroying action with the limited hardware that they had. This brings us to the 16-bit era of video games, and another noteworthy title, Dragon Ball Z Hyper Dimensions. And fun fact, this is the first Dragon Ball Z game I played thanks to emulation. And this game had some slick sprite work, a good roster, voice acting, attack straight from the show, and a low-key banging OST that is very underappreciated. And it even had some gimmicks to try and replicate the 3D action of Toriyama's work. But unfortunately, the game is just too slow and sluggish to fully replicate Dragon Ball's 3D action, although it most definitely did inspire Dragon Ball FighterZ. But although I was always more of a hyperdimension guy, it would be wrong of me to talk about this era of Dragon Ball video games and not mention the Super Butoden series, especially since it's one of the only Dragon Ball games we ever see Toriyama himself play. Inspired by the highly popular Street Fighter II, the Butoden series was a 2D fighting game, but still needed a way to capture the essence of the Dragon Ball source material in its gameplay. I mean, no offense to Ryu, but his Hadokens don't hold much of a candle to a planet-busting Kamehameha. Therefore, in order to replicate the large-scale spectacle of Dragon Ball fights, they came up with what they called the dual screen system. That's right, they put split screen into a 2D fighting game because Dragon Ball's battles are just that wide in scale and insane.
So again, moving on from that, we go into the 5th console generation with the disc-based 64-bit era. This is where games started to swap out sprites for 3D polygons, and where we would get Dragon Ball games like Dragon Ball GT Final Bout, which had an amazing anime opening, but outside of that, I will not let nostalgia blind me because that game was terrible. That gameplay was awful. And with Final Bout releasing in 1997, coinciding with the final episode of Dragon Ball GT, the gaming side of the Dragon Ball franchise went dormant. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. But 6 years later, a new series would begin. In the next generation, in the 6th generation, the PS2 era, we would get a series of Dragon Ball video games that would give us both amazing anime opening cutscenes and amazing gameplay. This is, of course, the now legendary Budokai series. And despite no anime running for that sweet brand synergy to help boost sales, instead, nostalgia would be the driving force to promote interest. But then Kazuhiko Terashima, Toriyama's first editor, and King Piccolo himself said no, rejected, until they fixed those hideous initial character models. And this series, especially Budokai 2 and 3, are legendary among Dragon Ball fans because it was a game series that gave us 3D action, in-game transformations, fun combat, a great story mode. You were able to blow up the planets. But the unfortunate caveat to this was that the 3D action, the 3D movement was primarily used for sidestepping. The game felt 2D most of the time, and other iconic aspects of Dragon Ball's action, such as chasing down your opponent in midair to smack them into a mountain and blowing up the planet, were more relegated to cutscenes, set pieces, and weird rock paper scissors guessing games in the middle of a fight. But with the massive sales of the Budokai series, especially in the West, it was clear that there was still indeed an appetite for Dragon Ball video games, and with the introduction of cel-shaded graphics to make the characters look more accurate to the source material, it was time for them to control like that and move like that as well. With the advent of the Tenkaichi series, which will give Dragon Ball fans the real 3D movement straight from the anime, along with real-time destructible environments, series producer Daisuke Uchiyama knew it was time to move Dragon Ball into the 3rd dimension proper, seeing that they had taken the 2.5D formula of the Budokai series as far as it could go. It was time to replicate the free-moving, explosive 3D action of the anime and smack your opponent into the side of a mountain in real time. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let's just admit that Tenkaichi 1 was pretty mid. I mean, the roster wasn't even that big, you couldn't transform in the middle of a fight, you couldn't blow up the planet, the beams lacked impact. I mean, what's the point of firing off a giant super Kamehameha if I'm not gonna cause an explosion the size of Australia? It was more of a glorified tech demo of things to come. But the things to come were glorious, as all of these issues were remedied in its sequel, Tenkaichi 2, which was one of the biggest gaming leaps of quality between sequels that I've ever seen. This game took the groundwork set by Tenkaichi 1 and added 5v5 combat. It added a deeper combat system that further replicated Dragon Ball's anime action, making it the first true Dragon Ball Z simulator fighting game. It had a story mode on par with Budokai 3, an insanely large roster, in-game transformations, and yes, you could blow up the planet. So Tenkaichi 3, the leap between Tenkaichi 2 and 3 is not as big as Tenkaichi 1 and 2. Tenkaichi 3 is more of a refinement of Tenkaichi 2, as it adds more anime accurate auras and beams. Beams can now trigger cinematic cutscenes, so attacks like Goku's instant transmission Kamehameha and Gohan's father and son Kamehameha are beams and not weird melee rush attacks. Arguably, the story mode was a bit of a downgrade, but I can let that slide because they made Tenkaichi 2's giant roster even bigger, adding fan favorites such as the GOAT, my GOAT, Future Gohan, along with characters ain't nobody playing as, like Dr. Wheelo. Ain't nobody maining Dr. Wheelo, but it's amazing that he's included. Now, there have been other 3D fighting games since the Tenkaichi series, such as its spiritual successor, the Raging Blast series. Now, that game has better graphics than Tenkaichi ever did, along with arguably a better combat system, but it just lacked the insanely large roster of Tenkaichi 3, and you couldn't blow up the planet. Like, blowing up the planet in a Dragon Ball fighting game is very important to me, if you haven't noticed. And then there was the Xenoverse series, which made great strides in telling a fresh Dragon Ball story within a Dragon Ball Z game. A key feature of the Xenoverse games is that it's the spiritual successor of the Dragon Ball Online game that was only available in Asia between January 2010 and October 2013. What makes this MMORPG so important was that Toriyama himself supervised and created an extensive amount of writings, materials and designs for the game, expanding on Dragon Ball's lore out of nowhere, such as the Bora having a sister called Toa, the Time Patrol, Future Trunks being part of the Time Patrol, the Time Breakers, and some other crazy obscure stuff that we will be getting into for a future video, so make sure to subscribe for that. The character creation is cool, but the action itself of the game is just too slow and sluggish to be an accurate anime recreation. And I mean, there are no beam struggles, like, come on man, that's unforgivable. So with all this being said, like, it's no wonder that Dragon Ball fans were all united in a singular moment of hype when a teaser trailer, not even 1 minute long, not even showing much in the way of gameplay, teased a sequel to the Tenkaichi series. As I said before, Sparking Zero isn't just a game, it means so much more. Dragon Ball is almost as old as video games as we know it. It's had video game adaptations since the NES days. With each adaptation, developers have tried to push the hardware to its limit in order to properly adapt Dragon Ball's 3D action, pioneered by the nigh peerless Akira Toriyama into an interactive medium. And now with Sparking Zero upon us, with video games having become so powerful, it looks like that time is finally upon us. This is the evolution of Dragon Ball video games. We may not be able to fly and fire ki blasts from our hands, but Sparking Zero is damn near close enough. I better see you guys online, because this just may be the most important Dragon Ball video game of all time. So in this video, I've talked about what makes Dragon Ball video games so special, what makes Dragon Ball's action so special, but what about the main character himself? What makes Goku so special? Well, to find out what makes Goku such a one-of-a-kind protagonist, click this video over here. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and stay locked into the cage. Peace out.